Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. I'm actually really glad we're convening this hearing today. I'll be honest, when I worked at the State Department, I was incredibly frustrated with the longtime career diplomats who were very resistant to change. And I think that mentality has contributed to the department's ineffectiveness over the years. I think reform is absolutely needed in the State Department. In fact, I passed bipartisan legislation to help address risk aversion and the bunker mentality at our embassies, and other reforms to how we do security assistance, how we do foreign assistance. So that's why I am so disappointed that this reorganization effort has become a partisan exercise marred by chaos and without regard to the law. Between the leaked proposal we've seen to slash the department's budget in half, the commitments to cut staff by 15%, despite the department now having to take on what is left of USAID programming, and reports that the department will significantly downsize its diplomatic presence abroad, taken together, I actually don't think these reforms will lead to a more effective State Department, which is what we really want. The reality is, we do need to think more strategically about what our national security priorities and interests are in a multipolar world. But Chairman Mast, I just fundamentally disagree with you that human rights and our values aren't part of that, because I think our power is derived from our ability to build international coalitions. And to do that, we need to address our values and build our coalitions around that. So first, I want to focus on an area of ongoing reform that I think we can learn from. Chairman Emeritus McCall and I, my good friend, introduced a reauthorization for the Global Fragility Act. This focuses on important reforms for how we get to align policy and programs, more robust monitoring and evaluation. But Secretary Rubio's reorganization proposal would shut down the Conflict and Stabilization Operations Bureau, which I actually worked at, which is leading the implementation. And look, we can have a separate debate on the best way to house the kind of conflict expertise in the department. We led a GAO review of CSO under the Biden administration. But Secretary Zaya, as Undersecretary of J, you oversaw the work of CSO and the Global Fragility Act. Can you discuss the importance of maintaining the Global Fragility Act team, led by an assistant secretary as required by law, to actually implement GFA and meet its statutory obligations?
Thank you, Representative Jacobs, and thanks to you and Representative McCall for your bipartisan leadership in the Global Fragility Act. This is exactly the kind of state modernization that I think we should rally bipartisan support for. And I saw this firsthand in my role as Undersecretary visiting GFA partner countries, Mozambique, Cote d'Ivoire, as well as Haiti. And what I saw on the ground was a shift away from open-ended assistance commitments, where implementation is defined as spending money, and really focusing on measuring results, evidence-based approaches, and course corrections. And it is very sad to me that this effort is now being potentially extinguished just 2 years in when it's starting to bear fruit. It's about integrating State Department efforts with our colleagues at DOD, with USAID, but also with international partners who have followed our lead, particularly in coastal West Africa, where we have 4 embassies working together in an integrated way I have never seen. But you've got the international financial institutions, the EU, and the Brits coming in behind to focus on the same areas. And I do want to make a point about human rights and security and hard security. Representative Wilson mentioned his visit to Syria. I was a human rights officer in Syria under Hafiz al-Assad. At this point, our support for pluralism, for inclusion of women in Syria's transitional government and process, that is absolutely a guarantor of security. And Syria is a diverse country of many faiths. We cannot allow it to fall into a majoritarian system that oppresses so many of Syria's people after the immense suffering they've had. That's also why accountability is so important, so we can finally achieve accountability for the Assad regime's horrific crimes.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I think one of the really innovative reforms in the Global Fragility Act is being able to assess the effectiveness of U.S. policy in a single country across all of our activities done by all different agencies. And I know that sounds simple, but actually GFA is the only capability we've ever had to assess whether or not our policy, whole of government in a country is actually achieving its goals. So I do hope that Secretary Rubio will maintain that function. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Jacobs. We now recognize Representative Smith from New Jersey.